So I had a long football career growing up. It was from August of 2001 all the way to probably about, I think, December of 2001. It was a really intense program. It was a very intense part of my life, and no, it wasn't. I was very terrible at it. But I was recruited for years. My gym teacher would beg me to go. He promised me A's in class and perfect scores if I would just go and try out for the football team. So I finally decided, fine, I'll try out for the football team. I have no regard for my own health and well-being, and I know how to hit people. So this is a good combination for me. And so I came in, and I was about as terrible as you can get, but I could hit people. And so he more or less had to kind of like wind me up and put me in a direction and be like, all right, go! And then I would just go and do what I was supposed to do. And one of the situations we were in a scrimmage against our own team, so we kind of split up in half, and half of us played against the other half. And so I was on the, I guess not as good half or something. So we line up, and when on the special teams, and they kick the ball off, and my job as the receiving end was to run back, run past the guy who catches it with everybody else, run up, and just start blocking. So he's like, okay, just aim and hit. I'm like, okay, that sounds good. I think I can do that. So the ball gets kicked off, and it goes over my head, we turn around, and we start running. And we're running together, and I'm running, and I'm just running as fast and as hard as I can, and then I begin to kind of zone out a little bit. I don't know if you've noticed this about me. I can kind of just go butterfly, so I'm running, and then, I get distracted for a second, and then I keep running as hard as I can, and we're making progress, we're moving forward, and then finally I realize where I am, and I zone back in, and I see the guy has caught the ball, and I'm running. But at some point along the way, I forgot where I started, so I thought I was on the defense team now. And so I now think, instead of being the first one to round the corner behind him to block for him, I am the closest one to stop this guy. And so I am running, this is a true embarrassing story. I'm running as hard and fast as I can, and I have the biggest smile on my face because I could never prove myself up to this point on how well I could tackle, but I was about to prove it. And I got there and I hit him so hard, and I picked him up when I hit him, and I ran down the field a little bit, and then kind of brought him down woo! Smashed him. And I remember even our helmets hit, and I'm like, and there was this exciting moment for me, and then all of a sudden, he looks at me and goes, and hits me, and he goes, why'd you tackle me? And I remembered that I didn't start on the defending team, or the team that was supposed to tackle. I was on the other team, and it was just this moment of utter embarrassment. I just remember walking to the sideline, knowing that I would never be able to play a game at any point, and it was all because I really forgot where I started. It all was because I forgot where I had come from. And I think we can do this in our walks with Christ, is when we're on these journeys of faith, we can begin this run, and we can remember, God saved me out of this. This is where I started, and for some reason, God allows me to be in His family, and He's adopted me, He's bought me, He's done all this, and we begin there, and we start to run, and we're running as hard and passionately as we can, and then what oftentimes creeps into our hearts is this forgetfulness of where I started. And as we run, we can lose focus. Maybe even end up tackling our own people, or hurting those that we don't desire to hurt. We end up forgetting whose team we're on. And all of these things happen, and I think the foundation of it is we forget where we started from. We forget oftentimes, don't we, that we've been saved out of mud and muck and mire. We forget that we ourselves were enemies of God, yet for some reason, for some beautiful reason, God still thought it would be worth it to send His Son to die for us. Amen? Amen. And it's so easy to forget that's where we start, that we are dead in our sins and trespasses, and yet it's God's grace that pursues us, and it's God's grace that wins us. And it's so easy for us to forget where we start. And until we remember and we have a common purpose and a common perspective that we all have a common need, I believe we can consistently play on the wrong team. We can consistently tackle our own people, and we can consistently miss the call that we have as a church and as a people. And I think this was the issue going on with Jonah, and we're getting the point in the book of Jonah. We've been going through over the last month or so this small book, but this beautifully dynamic book, but we're coming up to this crescendo moment, this moment where really the full point of the book comes together, and a lot of the loose ends start to get pulled together, and we see Jonah's perspective of God's mercy. And I think what happens is, and we're going to read it together, is we see that Jonah had forgot where he himself had come from and where the nation of Israel had come from. Israel was not this wonderfully powerful nation, and God's like, that's the nation I want to use because they're so great. But rather he's like, hey, there's a bunch of ragtag people that can't probably do much without me. They're the ones I want to use. And so as he calls them out, and as Jonah was called out, and as he became a prophet of God, and as he went out and was called to preach to this messed up, broken city of Nineveh, he sees repentance all throughout the city. They're calling out, they're worshiping God, and yet here's Jonah, who clearly forgot where he started, and he starts to complain to God. So we're going to go there together. So I want to ask everybody to go to Jonah chapter 3, starting in verse 10. I believe that helps tie into chapter 4. If you don't have a Bible with you, every seat has a Bible that looks just like this, and it's going to have the same words on it, and it's on page 633. So if you're new to the Bible, just look for the page number. If you don't own a Bible, please keep that as our gift to you. We can easily replace these. Jonah chapter 3, at the very end, right before chapter 4 begins. Bless you. Remember, all up till now, God calls Jonah. Jonah's like, okay, God. And then he takes off running, thinking he's going to run away from God. He ends up, in the ship, and God pursues him. He gets thrown overboard off the ship, and then God, in his grace, brings about a giant sea creature of some sort that swallows him up, and brings him over to the land, vomits him onto the land, and then God gives him a second chance to go and do what he told him to do. He does what he tells him to do, and the entire city repents. The entire city starts to worship God as God ought to be worshipped. And they realize their need before. But verse 10 gives us a glimpse of what God does because of the turning of the people of Nineveh. When God saw what they, the Ninevites, did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. But to Jonah, this seemed wrong, very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you were a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." But the Lord replied, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Really? So God had shown his great mercy on the people, and there was true change. They repented and they turned back. And what does this guy do? He begins to get depressed. He begins to be all sad. And it's described that Jonah, in verse 1, to Jonah this seemed very wrong. This word literally means like it was really, really bad. It was evil. He describes this as, this is like evil to me what God just did. That he would relent and he would be compassionate on the people. And he stood to God and he said, "God, what you're doing is evil. How ought you to show love to people who don't deserve it?" And I think maybe there's some cultural and racial issues going on here, and there's a hatred for them because they are not of Israel. They are outsiders, and he hated them. And he thought it would be evil for God to love them. And it's almost like he's going, "God, if you don't stand up for yourself, I will. If you don't do the right thing, I will." And I wonder about sometimes these situations, and then I look at my own heart and I realize I do the same thing all the time. But you come to God and you say some pretty ridiculous ideas. I think of like Job's wife, when Job was going through all this suffering, she's like, "Just curse God and die." But like, what would that get me? Why would I even do that? Why is that an option on the table? Like, if God is here, why would I want to curse him for it and then ask him to die? Same thing here. It's like, oh, just kill me, God. Just take my life away. And again, there's this, he missed it. And what did he miss? He saw the action of God to show mercy as something that was evil. And can I say this with certainty, without understanding a common need we all have, that we are all in need of God's grace from God, we will not understand the works of God. Did you hear me? Unless you realize, you understand that you need it as much as I need it, we're not going to get what happens when God moves. And that's what's going on. He's saying this is evil. This seems really messed up. These are some really messed up people. I mean, the Ninevites were disgustingly evil in the way they would murder and kill and sacrifice and do all kinds of terrible things that we've talked about, weeks ago. And yet God relents. God releases his judgment. I think sometimes this is reflected in our own hearts. Similarly with Jonah, when we ask about, like deathbed confessionals, like, well, what about those who their whole life, like a Hitler, if Hitler turned to God and said, God, I need you. What I've done is wrong. What I've done here is not right. Lord, take my life and change it. And he was shot. Let's just say that's what happened. Would it be just for God to forgive him? And if your stomach turns a little bit, you're like, I don't want to be in heaven with Hitler. Maybe we've missed what the works of God look like. Maybe we've missed that we ourselves are in a common need. That we ourselves began in a place of utter desperation, and yet God came near. One of these situations I see about when we forget our common need, and so the works of God are like confusing, we don't see it, is when Jesus is toward the end of his life and he's with his followers, and Judas, one of his closest, I mean, to be betrayed by someone, it's one of his closest 12, and he comes in and he hugs and he kisses Jesus to show who they're to go after, right? And so they go after Jesus, and as they do it, his disciples get all upset and start ready it's ready to go, because they imagined Jesus was going to be like this warrior. So Peter, one of his closest, pulls out a sword and he runs over and says, and cuts this guy's ear. Maybe he wasn't very good with a sword, I don't know, but he cuts the guy's ear off or slices it in some way, and then Jesus is like, no, stop it. And I just can imagine, they're all ready to fight. They're like, this is the moment that we're going to create this rebellion and everything else. He's cut off the ear. He's ready to maybe follow it with another cut. And Jesus says, stop. You don't understand my works. Quit it out. Right? And so then he walks up and he holds the man's head and he heals the man who's taking him to kill him. He heals his ear. And it's really after that we see all the disciples distancing themselves from Jesus. This idea that what is going on here? Why are you healing the very man that's bringing you for death? See, because I think Peter didn't understand that the death that would occur was as much needed for him as it was for the man that was stealing him, as much as it was for Judas who betrayed him. That Jesus' death was necessary for him. I can appreciate the heart of Martin Luther, one of the great reformers in history. The man used by God in some incredible ways, and I can imagine it would be easy, especially with his level of brilliance, to begin to become maybe a little arrogant. However, found by his deathbed was scrolled in German and Latin this statement: we are beggars. It is true. And it's probably this statement that is what inspired D.T. Niles to say this: evangelism is one beggar telling another beggar where he can find a piece of bread. We are beggars. If for any moment I forget that I'm a beggar as a preacher, fire me. Right? because I'm a fellow beggar. I'm a fellow man in need. I'm a fellow person that has had to rely on the grace of God, not on my own well-being and my own works. But I am a beggar. But rather than a beggar telling another, we can quickly become a sit-in judge for God. We can attempt to go in that position that God only belongs in, right? As a perfect judge. And what makes God such a good judge is that He is perfect. And when we try to be a sit-in judge for God, it's when we start to conflate ourselves and are convinced ourselves that maybe we don't have a common need like they do. See, without seeing our common need, it's very easy. We can become judges rather than servants. We can become judges rather than servants. Oh, who's that slide? Oh, let's skip some stuff. Matthew chapter 7 says this: "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eyes and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eyes." See, he stares at the speck and he judges the fact that he has a speck. It says you look at the speck in your brother's eyes, you focus on that speck. You're like, well, let me do something about this speck. And we begin to focus on the judgmentalness of that rather than the mercy that is needed. Rather than seeing that we all ourselves at some point have had a log jammed in our eye, haven't we? We've all had some sort of object in our face that have blinded us from being able to see clearly. But what I want you to understand here is that the reversal of that is a servant, is what we've been called for. Not judge, but servant. And I want you to see this. He says, but first, remove that speck, that log from your eye so you can see clearly, and then help them accurately. So it's not ultimately like I'm going to just never mention this speck. I'm never even going to worry about the speck. I mean, you deal with your speck, I'll deal with my log. You know, that's oftentimes what it's done, right? To be judgmental is like, I won't mention anything about the speck in your eye because I know I've got a log in mine. But rather he says, no, take that out so you can see clearly and actually serve them by helping them remove it. Look what Galatians says. Galatians chapter 6. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit can restore that person gently, but watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. You see the servanthood? We carry the burdens for each other. We sacrifice for each other. We are willing to get ourselves uncomfortable by explaining to each other, listen, this is the wrong way to live. But we do so as fellow beggars. We do so as fellow people who find themselves in a broken situation. Can I say one of the places that this really plays itself out, I think practically, is the difficulty to tell our kids it's wrong to do ... and we know what we've done, right? Or to tell the next generation, or to tell others in the church, it's wrong to do ... and we've done it. We've been there. And I think oftentimes culturally we've run like the other way. So, I can't tell you it's wrong. How many have heard this? If I've done it, I can't tell you it's wrong. But rather than these two extremes, I feel like there's this beautiful middle ground where it's like, listen, I have gone through this journey already, and you don't want to go through the thorn bush. It's much better to take the path. And yeah, I might have tried to climb over the thorn bush, and now I am bleeding because of that. Now it hurts. And now even while I walk on the path, there's some things that hurt a little bit as I walk. And instead of explaining our past sins in this way, we can tend to overgeneralize. And I think the heart there, the right part there, is because we don't want to take the position of God, assuming we're perfect. But remember, the choice there is that we actually take on the position of a servant for others. And here's where I see this, especially here in this passage. Look, but watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. And at first I used to assume, and it may still mean this, that don't be tempted. Maybe they're in a sin that's going to tempt you. The next thing you know, you're doing the same thing. But looking around this, like at the end of chapter 5 and the following verses, look what it says. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. And then right after this, it says this. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. Follow me here. It is seeing the temptation is seeing the opportunity to become self-righteous. It's to step in and call somebody out for sin, but to do it as the judge rather than the fellow broken and the fellow traveler. Isn't that so easy to do that? As we begin to conflate ourselves and inflate ourselves and start to look down as we see the brokenness in others. When we see how others limit the work of God, you could say and begin to inflate yourself and look down at that situation rather than lowering ourselves, deflating ourselves and seeing it. And this is why I believe with my whole heart that self-righteousness kills relationships. Self-righteousness kills relationships because we put ourselves in a position that we ought not to be in, right? See, the heart of this is there is no compassion, there is no care, there's not a realization that we also were sinking into the bottom of that ocean, that we also needed to be swallowed up by that fish and vomited onto the ground, that we also have run, that we also needed that compassion of God, and because we needed that compassion of God, we turn and we show that compassion to others. See, that's what works are for Christians. What it means to do the right thing is to live with what you've gotten. It's not like just go figure it out. It's like, look what God did for you. It's like, look at all the love and the mercy and the sacrifice God did for you. Now go do it. Go try it. That's why in Philippians it says, take on a heart of humility. This is super summarized. But take on the heart of humility like Jesus Christ, who decided equality with God, not something to be grasped, but rather took on the form of a slave and came to this earth and sacrificed everything. And then ultimately not just a slave to men, but came up and died for us. And so it was for Jonah. He truly lacked compassion and care for those he interacted with throughout the story. And you see, he had a good theology of the character of God, but he clearly didn't share this. Because look at it. Now, Lord, he prayed to the Lord, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you were a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Yet, throughout the book, and again, I think there's a lot of poetry in the book of Jonah. Look at how he didn't tell others what he knew. When he's on the ship, the captain responded by saying this: how can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish. Maybe, or in Jonah chapter 3, the king responds and they're repenting and he says, who knows? God may yet relent and with compassion turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. We don't know, but maybe. Yet Jonah says, I knew that you were a gracious and compassionate God. I just decided not to say it to anybody else. I just decided that I was not even a receiver of it or in need of it myself in the way that they needed it. See, without seeing our common need, we can believe more than we can be life. Without our common need, we can believe instead of be life. And in Isaiah chapter 58, I want to end with this thought, is Isaiah comes to, God speaks to the nation of Israel, and he calls them to turn from their ways in the way in which they're worshiping, because their worship and their fasting was clearly misaligned with the heart of God. And this is how he realigns it. He says, shout it aloud, do not hold back, raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. This is what he's saying to Isaiah, saying to them. And it says, for day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways. See, they want to know it. As if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near to them. You see, they wanted all the benefits of what it meant to be their people and the people of God. And they say, why have we fasted, they say. You've not seen us. Why have we humbled ourselves? You have not noticed. Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Did you hear that? It's like, you want to know why your fast doesn't work? Because you leave the place and you run your business to exploit people. Because when you walk out of the church, you say me first. Because when you leave the comforts of us coming together and worshiping God as one voice, when you leave that, you no longer care about what was going on in that place and what that really was about. And you go on and you exploit, and you go on and you hurt, and you go on and take advantage of, you go on and you lose the heart and the compassion of God. So your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, and it's striking each other with wicked fists. I do not understand how that works. You fast and then at the end of the fast you end up in a fist fight. But you cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. And then this is the flip end of this. He's like, is this the kind of fast I've chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Only a day? Isn't that funny? Don't we all have to do that with church? It's only a day that I kind of have to come and worship God. It's only really a day that I got to go into this emotional moment and sing to God only. But rather he's saying, I don't want just a day. You know, want the day, give him the day too, right? But not just the day. When we leave, it needs to be different. That's why my prayer every week is that we leave, myself included, refined and refreshed and renewed in such a way that when we walk out, maybe we were tripping up before we got here, but when we walk out, we live differently. And I think the foundation of that is we understand where we came from. Is it only for God and His? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Here's the fasting He wants. Is not this the kind of fasting I've chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Amen. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor, whatever, with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not turn away your own flesh and blood. Then your life, then after you actually live this, then your life will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Follow his line of thinking. Follow what's going on and the limitedness of Jonah's perspective here. See, Jonah was not aligned with the heart of God. Jonah was not linked up. He just was going through the motions. He knew that God was compassionate and gracious, but he didn't realize that compassion and that grace he needed as much as the Ninevites. And when we create these gaps between us, when we create these large gaps where we attempt to use whatever means to create these spaces between believers, between our unified front that we need to have, when we do this, we can quickly just make it a cerebral, just a mental thing, like I need to know more. And God says, yeah, keep learning, but what you know, are you doing it? I love dealing with theology and with the Bible and learning more. But consistently in that process, I have to take a step back and go, but am I going to do it? Am I going to do what it's saying? Like the very easy things, or the very obvious things. You know, God called us to be compassionate. I mean, He just gave us a list here, didn't He? And we look around and we say, who around us are the naked that we need to clothe? Who around us are the poor that we need to give to? Who are the hungry that we need to feed? Who are the foreigners, as it's told elsewhere, that need to be brought together and to be cared for in such a beautiful, unique way? Who are the widows that we need to come around and care for and sacrifice for and give to? Who is it? And where are they? But more importantly, where are the people of God in their realization of what God did? Let me just say, the only reason I do what I do, the only reason I believe God's called me into ministry, and for whatever reason has allowed me to be in this position, which I still don't totally get, is because I know what God did for me. I know the love that God showed me that I did not deserve. And if God could love me, God can love you. Please stand with me. We started yesterday. We began a team. There was a pretty good group of us deciding together, let's do this. Let's stop just talking about it and let's do it. And we began with this question of how we ought to play this out, how we ought to live this out, and the way we're looking forward. And maybe you want to join this team and be part of this, is to ask the question, what needs are before us? God, break our hearts for your community. Break our hearts for the ministries that you have for us and have provided the opportunities for. I pray that you reveal to us in some way, I don't know what that looks like, Lord God, but make it clear where we ought to go as a church, as we sacrifice and we give. Show us those that need to be clothed. Show us, Lord, those that need to be fed. Lord, show us those that are the widows and the orphans and the foreigners of our communities, Lord God, that we might be able to come around them and show your love and compassion and not just be believers of the truth, but to be livers of that truth. So God, I pray right now that we together humble ourselves and remember first and foremost, before we ever step foot to serve another, that we ourselves are in utter desperation and need for you. God, remind me this daily. Break me in whatever way you see fit, for me to be reminded of where I started. God, we lay at your feet this service. We ask you to do something bigger and greater than we can try to do ourselves. We ask that you go before us and allow us to serve you in the way you call us. In Jesus' name, amen.